What's going on, guys? It's me, Bel Air, blown up really big. Don't worry, I'm going to change that in a second. We are doing round two, version two of 2.0 of Bel Air's big board. This is my pyramid of who I think are the top 50 players in the RLCS right now. I put this out. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw this the other day. I pinned this to my page, and we've got some feedback. And I want to talk about some of the players that have had the most buzz in the comments as we get to them. But I also just kind of want to work through this and give you guys my thoughts and perspective on how I landed where I landed. So let's come back over here. And excuse me, I just got home from work, made a little bit of dinner. So excuse me as I got the hiccups. That looks like a good size for my face. And is that good? Can you see everything? You can. So let's get into the exercise and start up top. Drawley, there was a little bit of pushback on this. I think there's always going to be pushback when we're talking about the best in the world for that coveted #1 spot. Everybody wants to be the great. Out of the top three, though, I think the one that got the most, that caused the most friction or conversation was Vatira. Just looking at the top three, I feel pretty good about it. If you remember this, when I did this post Birmingham, I actually had Drali, Zen, Daniel as my top three. You can see Daniel has fallen down a little bit here, still within our top 10. And when I posted it, the first one, it left a bit of a poor taste in my mouth because I just didn't really know who to put there. I do feel like it's Drali and Zen. And then there's a conversation for a lot of players. I opted for Vatira just because of the accrued legacy, the fact that KC has continued to win at a high clip with every roster that he's been a part of. I still think that he is the vocal leader of that team. He's the framework. He's the defensive backbone. So just because he's not doing as much offensively and not always delivering the same highlight packages that he did 2 seasons back when he was called on to do more offensively for other iterations of this team. I don't really think that Vatira has wavered too much. To be completely honest with you, when I did this top three, I didn't really, I've done a lot of iterations of this. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations, and there's some on here that I did digitally for this exercise. The top three felt very easy to me. I did have a blink test for a second at did I really want to put Zen above Drali. I just think I don't know. Carmine Core, from what I understand, Atau was, or someone on the team was sick during the Swiss. They dropped one to Dignitas, who's beat them before. Dignitas, of course, had a great event. They were in form. They go all the way to the grand finals. So that one's like a double asterisk because it's a really strong European team who's beat them previously. And also there might be some ailments that are plaguing them. And then they get reverse swept by Twisted Minds, which is just kind of like, I'm not saying it's not a bad loss. It's a terrible loss for Carmine Core. But don't forget that after game 3, I mean, they were up 5-0 in that game 3, and it just seemed like it was over. And I felt like they kind of took their foot off the gas, and a ton of credit is owed to Twisted Minds. And we're going to talk about all 3 of those players as we go through this exercise. But I mean, a loss to Dig and then like a historical kind of fluke, if we're all being honest. Like Carmine Core were killing Twisted Minds up until that point. And you end up getting reverse swept where it's all this pressure and you should be winning and this and that. So I didn't take too much away from like just the reverse sweep. I think a lot of people are like, oh my God, how could you possibly have Drali after the way that they exited? It's like, all right, pump the brakes. Like, this is not supposed to be like, hey, here's the Raleigh Major. You know, this is like what we're thinking about in the world. And I tried to not overreact or be a prisoner of the moment too much. But that's enough being said about them. Let's move down to our third row here. Rawas, Nobu, and Beast Mode. When I did this exercise before, Daniel was above Beast Mode. And I struggled with that because I do think that the biggest X factor on the team is Beast Mode. Like, if Daniel and Atomic and Beast Mode are all at the peak version of themselves, I think I'd want to build a team around beast mode. Not only what he's able to bring to the table offensively, I think he's excellent as a defensive player as well. I don't think anybody is as strong as a goal line defender as Daniel, perhaps in the world. But a lot of that comes on the heels of NRG kind of putting themselves in some rough spots sometimes. Not that that takes away from Daniel necessarily, but I'm just saying it's not like I think beast mode is such a rare talent for what he is on the ball, the gravity that he makes defenses commit to him because of how dangerous he is. And then also, I heavily weigh off the field intangible stuff. I think that he is a player that you can build an excellent team, foundation, organization around. So those are some of the highlights about beast mode as to why I put him up here. I didn't really struggle too much with that one. I feel like he deserves to be in top 6 conversations. It's not like NRG are a bad team. They've been the number 1 team in North America 2 splits in a row now, and they're the only team in the world to make both top 4s. Granted, they struggled mightily to make it at points to both of those top 4s, but I'm just saying. Rawas, Kalir's is a little lower, and he's one of the players we're really going to talk about. But speaking about his twin, if I had to replace Vatira with someone, I think the likely candidates would be this next row here: Rawas, Nobu, and Beast Mode. And really, I'd probably, honestly, with where we are right now, trend towards one of the Mina boys. Rawas, I think, is do it all. I think he's the best player on that team. I think defensively, some of the stuff that he does is brilliant. I'm not breaking any news with that. And I do think that the defensive resume kind of overshadows some of the stuff that he can do offensively, especially the way that Falcons, and it is a team effort in the way that Falcons kind of orchestrate what they're trying to do offensively. But some of those tight rotations and pushing the offense up really far, keeping a high third line, TRK is your most common back. But I think that the ability of all of these players, but Rawas in particular, to get back and be agile defensively in transition, to shut stuff down before it gets super dangerous. His ability to not always just kick a ball into a corner and kind of get into that, like, a little more of a mindless offensive approach, just going through the motions to try and be dangerous. It seems like Rawas, with a lot of his touches, is first taking a read of the pitch, and he'll try and sustain offense as opposed to taking a shot that might easily be blocked away and brought in transition. I think he's a super smart player, and there's very few players that I think are better than him in the world. And I don't want to speak long-winded about every single one of these players, but at least a top 10 I wanted to shine some light on. But I'm also realizing now that I didn't bring any water, so I'm going to be getting coarse as the video goes along. Let's talk about Nobu. Jumped in a huge way up my rankings. I was blown away by his performance in Raleigh. Gosh, I mean, where do I start the praise? I think the thing, I had tweeted something similar to this, but I think the rarest skill in the RLCS, and typically where we see the best players in the world trickle up to, is the ability to always sustain dynamism on the ball. The ability to always, no matter where you touch the ball, where you start your play from, how much momentum, which direction you're facing, grounded, sidewall, your own backboard, odd angles, off the ceiling, double, anywhere that Nobu catches the ball, I always think something good is going to happen from this play. And I think that that is a really rare quality that players like Drali, Zen, Beast Mode, just looking at some of the players in our top 10 here. First Killer, Joyo is a reduced version of the caliber of those players, but these players where I'm just like, man, every single time they touch it, I think something good is going to happen offensively. The ability to beat two. Nobu has it all. Really, he's up into this class because of his skill, and I think to go higher up the board, like, you're not going to put Victor Wembanyama up on the board like super early, because there is still this piece of proving it and developing a resume and winning at the highest level. That the talent that is surrounding him has been able to achieve and build that he hasn't. So for Nobu to crack the top six, not that I'm like the end all be all on uh, rating players or anything like that, but I think the fact that he's up here, at least like for me, is a huge sign of respect. I think that he's that talented of a player, and he probably leaped higher than anybody else on my board from Birmingham to this exercise. Okay, let me scroll down a bit, give you guys a little teaser for what's next while I have a little yawn. And let's talk about this next row. Let's round out our top 10. FK, Atal, TRK, Daniel. Um, this is where it's funny. Let's just go down. First Killer, I really flirted with putting First Killer a row up and having him be the best player in North America. I really did. I think he's that special of a talent still to this point. Um, I get it. You know, Fraud Killer, Second Killer, all these fun little monikers about the fact that he has been unable to summit that final mountain and win one of these events. But God, it just every time I watch a First Killer game, he'll do two or three things where I'm like, God, how how did he how did he do that? Whether it's the ability to um, know what a defender is going to do and score past them, and then the next time you're in a similar situation, have a computer index of what you had done the first time, knowing what the defender will anticipate and going a different way. So maybe the first time, really hard and heavy, double off the backboard, and you just crush it down into the top of the net. And then the next time you take that, slower approach and just kind of roll it under him. It just seems like he has the full tool belt. He is the Kyrie Irving equivalent of an RLCS player where the bag is super deep. And I just like Nobu, always think he's going to do something good on the ball. There have been some moments, especially tense, big moments, where First Killer struggled. Of course, the Gen G from last season with Jack and Chronic, where they lose to Fiber and the boys, was a blemish for sure. Even something like when they were going up against Gen G comes to my mind in Neo Tokyo Game 6, where as soon as overtime starts, First Killer tries to take a slow touch, Cheese dunks him to win the series. There's little things like that where I'm like, man, First Killer can get a little jumpy here and there. But throughout the totality of the split, I do still think people could have strong arguments against it. I'll listen. I feel really strong about his spot on this list. And to be honest, I didn't see too many people arguing with that either. Nobody argued about Atal, which is nice. I got a lot of feedback about Atal last time. I think I had him a row lower than I did. Actually, I might have had him in the Daniel spot, but that's when KC won the land, so I got it. But I think that's about where he deserves to be. I think he's the third best player on Carmine Core. If all three of them were going to break up tomorrow and they said, hey, Belair, have your pick. Who do you want to build your next roster around? I think that's how it would be the third pick. He'd be a very high pick for me, but out of KC, that's where he'd be. TRK, I'll be honest with you, kind of a like, you deserve it kind of spot, I don't know if I can make a super strong argument for like TRK is untouchable and there's no way that you could, like, if you want to argue that Daniel should be higher than him, I'll hear you. Even if you want to argue that Killiers is the better Falcon than he is, I hear that as well. But similar to Vatira, it's a couple of the things that I really value, that I'm kind of speaking through in this exercise so far, being an X factor, being unstoppable on the ball, and also being like a leader slash anchor. Like those two words are interchangeable in some ways to me, and that's really, really valuable. Beast mode, Vatira, even a player like TRK, just like what he means to the Twins and to the Falcons, and kind of getting them ready for that moment, embracing that moment, and achieving what they achieve. TRK is always the one who's, the vocal leader, the middle of them, in the middle of lifting the trophy. Like TRK is the floor general, the what's the word I'm looking for? The team captain. Captain. I think that's really, really valuable. And TRK is one of the better ones. Okay, Daniel, we've already talked about him a little bit. I think maybe the best goal line defender in the world. I get that it's approach based. I really kind of want to, if I find the time, I'd like to make it if I can find the time. Daniel's shooting percentages over the course of the season are so gross that I thought it was an error at first. But it's not. I get that, like, part of what Energy is trying to do and what a lot of teams try and do. Think about Team Liquid from a previous version when they had Atow and Oski. Shots. Pepper the net, break down the defense, make them scramble, make communication hard, and then you can try and finish off of that. I get that there's a piece of it where not every shot is intended to be a goal. Daniel, I think for the season is like 12% shooting percentage or something. He's like in the bottom rung of like all players in the RLCS, not just NA, not just LAN, like all. I'm just saying, but I still think he's that special. Very, very gifted offensively. The shooting numbers are bad, but that does not mean that he is not super dynamic on the ball. There's few players I would take over him if I was like, hey, you got to go get me a bucket. You know what I mean? All right, scroll down a little bit more here. Getting a little wider on the list. Excuse me. All right. Next row. Appjack, Monkey Moon, Atomic, Yan, Killiers. I got some feedback on this one. Yan surprisingly unscathed, I gotta say, and Monkey Moon. I think there's one comment maybe about Monkey, and that's it. Jack. Before I went through the exercise, if you would have asked me, I don't know how many people are higher on Jack than I am. There's a couple players that I'll talk through in this exercise that I'm definitely, I'm over committed to these players compared to kind of the general community. Jack's one of them. I know people really love Jack. He's probably a top 20 player for most people. Before I did the exercise, just if you would have asked me, I'd be like, Jack's a top 10 player. He ended up being 11th, and I feel good with where he is. But yeah, I think that while I think the conversation has to start with the grand finals, right? A win over KC, 2 losses to Falcons that were not close, and then they kind of try and get chippy in the last one in the grand finals. They end up falling again. Kind of a decent road there. You get to beat Team Secret, a Vitality team that you've really had their number. So I'm not saying that the grand finals is not impressive. Anybody making it to the top 8 of a LAN is impressive, because I think there's probably 10 or 11 teams that could vie for those spots. Any team that can make a championship Sunday, very, very impressive. And Jack has also won one of these before. A lot of baggage coming in. Him and Jorius have been teammates before and did not do well at their last LAN together. They overcame that. Stizzy's still a young player within the context of the, greater RLCS community. All that being said, I think Jack is the fulcrum point to get Dignitas to the level in which they are. Stizzy's very impressive. You can see that we're going to be talking about him very soon. Jorius, a player I got the most feedback on where he's listed. I still, despite that, there's some players where I got feedback and I was like, dang, I think you might be right. Like Killiers, I probably should have had Killiers higher. And we're going to talk about him in a second as well. But like, I feel pretty good about most of these. And I do feel relatively good about where I have Jorius. But again, we're talking about Jack. I just think he's that guy. One of my favorite players to watch on the ball. Everything is very crisp and the mechanics are very clean when it's looking its absolute best. Monkey Moon, similar to TRK and Vatira, it kind of starts with resume. I mean, like, if you want to be like, oh, Monkey Moon, what has he done recently? I think it's kind of funny how people talk about Vitality, where it's like this team, it's almost, if you didn't watch and you just listened, you'd think that Vitality were just like stinking up the joint constantly and couldn't win anything and were getting buried by all these teams. They have a lot of losses on their resume that you're like, ooh, for sure. Like, fast forward comes to mind right away. I think it was their first series of the season, which might be why it's ingrained in my brain. They've had a couple where it's like, can you guys like get it together over there? I don't know what's going on. But this Vitality team is still so good. Um, they melted through the Swiss, and then they couldn't overcome their demons. They looked awesome on Saturday, and then they looked awful on Sunday. And credit to Dig for that. But I mean, all things considered, this seems like a really fair spot for Monkey Moon. Um, yeah, I don't really have too much to say. I would have a hard time putting any players on the row below, for example, above Monkey. If you want to have like sliding scales within this, and you think Colliers is better, and you value Yan, and some people rightfully think that Atomic is the most um, overall strong player, the best Swiss Army knife on NRG. That's your prerogative, but like this row seems like about as far as I would drop him, and I don't really. It's hard for me to entertain arguments against that. Um, Atomic, I just kind of talked about him a little bit. When I did this for Birmingham, I was like, man, like, is Atomic the best player on NRG? And he still might be. NRG is a tough one to kind of understand. I think for me, it comes down to if you like really wanted to like nitpick between the three of them and talk about consistency, like um, I know what I'm getting from Daniel defensively. That's kind of like a mainstay. It's probably the strongest, most consistent piece of NRG. If it were like beast mode offense or defense, Daniel offense or defense, Atomic offense or defense, Daniel defense seems like number one for me. And then I feel like beast mode offense is like he's always generating something, and that anytime you talk about the RLCS and you bring up two players, it seems like you're shortchanging the third just because you talk about them last. It's not the case. Like what I will say, one of the things that jumped out to me the most that I will take away from the Raleigh Major was how impressed I was that Atomic was able to look as great as he was in the comeback, especially against Twisted Minds. He was put in some very difficult situations, especially deep into that series, where Atomic was the reason not only that they stayed afloat, but were able to come back. With that being said, if I think about what NRG were last season at their peak of powers, the piece that seems as though it has wilted the most is Atomic's threatening nature on both ends of the ball. I do feel like they're trying to maybe work through something there. I'm not going to get too into like the psyche of all of this because I can already feel myself fading, and then this will become like this very speculative video. I don't want it to be that. And I also feel myself like giving negatives about Atomic, but I also have him as the 13th best player in the world. So maybe the best North American resume of all time in Atomic, and still getting it done. So he's 13th. Yan, we talked about dynamic scores. He's one of those. Do we need to have too long of a conversation about Yan? I was unimpressed by Yan, but I was overwhelmed by Furia as a whole at this event. So I feel like this is fine for him. I probably, if I did it again, probably would have put Colliers above him. And yeah, Colliers, the player that I got the most feedback on. I kind of gave my thoughts on this to somebody who had tweeted. A lot of people were tweeting this same sentiment, and I get it. My perspective on this is, I think he is the third most valuable player on the Falcons. I think that TRK brings them together. I think that Rawas's defense is, and his flexibility around the pitch are what allow them to do what they do. In order for them to be as dominant as they were, you have to have this version of Clears. Clears being what this version of Clears was, is what made them one of the most historically dominant teams that we have ever seen at LAN. He won the MVP. He had over a goal per game on over 4 shots per game. One of the best shooting performances we've ever seen. One of the best offensive performances we have ever seen. If I were to build a team tomorrow, Clears would probably be the third player I would pick from Falcons. And now that I'm looking at this, I might choose him in front of a couple of players that are ahead of him to like start a roster. That's not the whole point of this exercise, but just as like a, if you're going to boil it down, I still like maybe move him up a couple of spots, but some people were like, how is Clears not the best player in the world? I think you and I, if you are one of those people, value different things in Rocket League, which is fine. I'm not the source of truth about Rocket League. This is Belleair's big board. This is my opinion. It's heavily influenced by the players that I appreciate and like value the most, right? That's the whole point of this exercise. This isn't a Rocket League RLCS community board. It is mine. With that being said, Clears within a couple of spots. I feel pretty good about where he's at. All right, let's move down a little bit. LJ, Stizzy, Lost, Eugen, Joyo, and Seiko. 2 Gentlemates guys off the board here. LJ, I actually had him much lower. And then the more I looked at it, I was just like, are you serious? Like, I do think that LJ offensively at LANs is something to behold. I even went back and watched when they lost the Team Secret matchup. The real weak spot for me was Chronic, pretty much time and time again throughout that. I watched LJ point of view quite a bit, thinking like, I felt like I remembered it being like, man, LJ really let them down. I just kept watching plays where I was like, heads up play by LJ, smart play LJ, putting them in a good spot. I think he's really good. And he's kind of like a point for me where it's kind of like Clears, that's like a clear cut for me. And then there's like a fall down. And then it's kind of like LJ is almost not quite, but he's just slightly above this next kind of group. Like, I really am probably higher on Lost than most. I think I'm higher on Joyo than most. I talked about that thing that I value with that kind of being so dangerous on the ball. But yeah, we start to introduce some of our newer, our younger players here as well. Not young like, Kofor or Swift young, but young to us as household names. Players like Stizzy, players like Eugen. We have the world champion Seiko. At the end of this list there. Eugen, actually, I didn't really get too much feedback about him, and I had him a row lower where I was kind of like, you got to prove it a little bit more, but then I put Nobu that high up, and I put Stizzy here, and I was like, gosh, I feel like Eugen's like about at that level. I honestly might be higher on Eugen than Stizzy in a vacuum. Of course, this exercise isn't completely just like about them as a vacuum. It is mostly, I have them very close to each other. It is kind of about the context of your teams and what you're asked to do and what we've seen. I do think that Stizzy has a little bit more of that like dog in him, if we want to take like an old traditional sports adage here. But Eugen as a prospect, not many players that are brighter than him. Really big fan of his game. Now he got that first time jitters out. They're up against it because now they got to qualify through LCQ, which Europe is going to be really tough, and we'll probably talk about that in a video in the future. Lost, I'm a huge fan of Lost. If I were to be like, somebody was like, hey, give me 3 quick points about Birmingham, one of the first things that pops in my mind is how impressive Lost was there. That really kind of resonated with me. And the fact that Furia have continued to be so consistently dominant domestically, even though a player like Raisbull comes back and makes Corinthians much stronger. Godfidence, another strong team. Team Secret have clearly improved what we saw from them at this land performance. They've continued to just get the job done time and time again. Amethyst, another team that's kind of poking around down there. Moonrise, I could go on and on for different teams that we have in South America. But I think a big part of what makes things hum for Furia the way that they do is Lost. He can do whatever you need him to do. He is an excellent defender. He's probably their most common, like, okay, you got it, you're the last man back defender. He's also great at facilitating to his teammates. Sometimes he can get a little over eager and can try and force a passing lane when there's not one there that'll lead to an interception. His ability to be dynamic on the ball, whether it be ground fakes, power shots, solo stuff on the ball. I think that Lost is kind of lost, pun not intended, within the wider context of the RLCS. He's overshadowed by Yan and Furia's continual kind of that ceiling that they've hit at that top 4 mark kind of hard caps him here, but I am putting him as high as I feel like I can because I'm that big of a fan of his game. Joyo, another one like TRK and Monkey Moon, where it was kind of like you deserve to be up here. The more I stared at it, and a couple people said this, it was like, that's too high for Joyo. I think you're probably right. I don't even know if I'm this high on Joyo, but when I was going through the exercise, just every time I kept being like, you know, Joyo is just, I think he's that special. And the fact that GK were not here, is he the first player off the board who's not in attendance? He is. Out of all the players not in attendance, I think Joyo is probably the best one. He's definitely the one that I would choose, I think. Yeah, GK are very strong. Archie and Oli are much lower down the list. I think GK's success is in many ways due to how good I think Joyo is. I could be right, I could be wrong, but that's where I put him. Seiko, another player very high up the list. For me, I had him above Eugen at first, and then the fact that I kept, every time I did this exercise, I have like a bunch of these around me. One of them fell on the ground. I got a couple over here. I tried to be thorough and think this over and give this a couple of days. Every time I kept doing it, I kept kind of interchanging them. And then finally I was just like, I think I like Eugen more. So we'll put it there. And they're close. All right, next row. Is this going to fit? It is. Rise, Exotic, Chronic Oski, Kofer, Cheese, and Swift. Who do I feel the strongest about? It's Rise. Yep. Just so good. If Rise were just insert generic third player, if Rise were Exotic, that comeback would not have happened. If Rise were Seiko or Eugen or Lost or Stizzy or LJ, that comeback would not have happened. If it was Yan, it probably wouldn't have happened. I reserve a spot for Joyo just because he's just crazy enough to where it's just like, we'll still get this done. Rise is that player, has that experience on land to just be like, nope, we're still in this. Against Carmine Core, they just crushed us. We're going to win this. We're going to reverse sweep this. And they got it done. So powerful. I talked about this in my recap after the event. So powerful off the ball, stopping offensive attacks. Very, very smart positionally, and especially in transition defense to kind of stave off some of those attacks or like power positions that offenses could kind of sink into. And also very good, of course, at bumps to make space, or demos, of course, to make space, but also bumps, which don't show up on the stat sheet in the same way. Just really an agent of chaos, and deserves the right to still be up here, in my opinion. Exotic, very hard to slot in. Very, very up and down player. The same with a player like Chronic or a player like Oski. That trio is pretty feast or famine from what I feel like I've seen from them over the course of this season. When they're at their peak, they can be A row or two higher, Exotic, a world champion, MVP. Chronic has lifted a trophy. Oski, I think, is the best player on Ninjas in Pajamas, and they've got the job done in Swiss time and time again, but then have fallen short. Yeah, really feast or famine that group there. Kofor, I would revisit Kofor. I would. I do think he's that talented though, and that's kind of where I got down to in this exercise. Like, have we seen enough from Kofor? I don't know. They were the 2 seed in North America, and I think he's the best player on that team. If it were to be like, hey, Stizzy, Eugen, Swift, Nass, I'm just trying to look at some of the young ones in front of me. Frosty, Scribbles, Kofor, like, where would you pick him? And I did that exercise with like the young guys who have less pedigree, and that's where I put him. I think Eugen and Stizzy is kind of a toss up. I think we've seen more from Stizzy so far on a better team. He made the grand finals. We haven't seen the same thing from Eugen. And Kofor, not a good performance from SSG, but it's 3 rookies. I don't know. I was back and forth on him. Cheese, another player like Appjack, I'm probably higher on Cheese than most. I just really value what he does on both ends of the ball. I think that he is underappreciated as a defender. His ability to kind of intuitively guess where a shot is going to come, where it's 2 players kind of converging on a play. He just kind of knows where to go for the read on the ball. Definitely more of a raw talent than some of these other guys. You put him up against the 2 players he's sandwiched between. Kofor and Swift are going to have prettier highlight reels, but Cheese, a little bit of that dog in him that we talked about with a player like Stizzy. I just think that Cheese is really, really good. And I think he's the best player on Gingy. I've thought about Gingy a lot. I don't know what it is about that team that I just always come back to thinking about them. Swift, you guys have heard me sing his praises. One of my favorite young players. They looked excellent. Team Secret looked excellent in Raleigh. Although I will say, I felt like their performance, the quality of result that they got, was in a big way due to KV1 and Mata playing better than, if you were to average out all of their results, these were on the higher end for KV1 and Mata. And it was a good showing from Swift, but he didn't have this like, oh my gosh, like watch out, it's Swift impact that I still think that he'll be able to get to in the near future. Okay. Well, I already scrolled down. This is the rest of our list. I don't know if I'm going to talk about each player. I might end up doing it anyways. Drufo, Jorias, Juicy Nass, Magic Bear, Frosty, and Scribbles. For anybody who's curious, 21 European players, 19 NA players. So I skew a little bit to Europe, and you can see we get a little rich in North American talent, especially in that bottom row there, which we'll get to in a little bit. Jorius is here. I don't know where to start because I just feel like I see it differently. He made the grand finals. He had a couple huge highlight plays, especially on Aquadome in the game that they ended up losing to Falcons. He had those 2 like crazy highlight plays. But Joris can be really, really good, and then he cannot be. He was really, really in his head. I felt like he was the reason that they sunk in round 5 in Birmingham, for example, a recent example. He's the player that is tasked to do the least on the ball for Dignitas. He doesn't even lead the team in saves either. So he is very valuable, but he doesn't show up statistically. And I really think if he didn't have this couple of highlights, like it seems like I'm dunking on him, but just I'm defensive because of how upset people were by Jorius being here. Are Drufinho and Juicy not really good players? Is Nass not one of the best young players who's like up and coming? I feel like this is a fine spot for Jorius. I didn't know that people were going to be so upset. I don't think he's better than Rise. I don't think he's, I mean, I guess he could be up, like if you really like at its height, you could move him up a row to here, but some people were like Jorius has got to be top 10. I'm like, can you please do your list and send it to me? Because I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't even if you wanted to say, I don't see a world where you think that he's the best player on Dignitas. I just, maybe he was so low to some people that they were lashing out, and now I'm doing the same thing. I've kind of created a vicious cycle here. It seems like I don't like Jorius. I really, really like Jorius. But I thought that this was really fair for the quality of player that he is. So maybe we just don't see eye to eye on that. Magic Bears here. I put him ahead of Frosty and Scribbles. I still think that there's like something there for Magic Bear. Probably the player that I have spent the most time. I mean, Genji, the team that I think about the most. Magic Bear, probably the player that I've thought about the most, just because of the flashes that he shows. It's like, God, like at one point a couple seasons ago, it was like, is he going to be able to evolve to be like a top 3 player in North America? I think we're past that point with Magic Bear for sure. Maybe not. Who knows? Who knows? He could totally figure something out later in his career. Never say never to anybody improving their game. But this feels like a good spot for him. I'm probably a little higher on Magic Bear than most, just because I value what he can do. Very fluid, even when off the ball, like the way he moves about the pitch. I really like, in the same way that Lost can get a little trigger happy, like spitting a ball down into the middle, which can put his team in a bad spot. Magic Bears had a couple of those. But I feel pretty good about this. Frosty, I'm still very, very high on. Complexity did not have the split they wanted to have. They turn around, they remove Frosty, they add Kofor, and now they make it. I get it. I still really value what Frosty can do in the same way that we've talked about what he could be like some of these other players. Could Frosty eventually be the same kind of on-ball threat that a player like LJ is, that a player like Appjack or First Killer could be? It's not out of the cards for me. Scribbles, I said that Nobu hopped up higher than anybody. Now that I'm looking at it, it's definitely Scribbles. Very, very impressed by him. Really, really good player. Well, Kofor, obviously. I didn't have him on my list either. But yeah, Scribbles is really, really good defensively. Some of those defensive numbers too. Like if you look at like saves per goal allowed, Scribbles is like unbelievable. It's like jaw dropping. Archie, Atomic, Justin, Rusty's 95. Reveal, Oli, CRR. Atomic was not happy with where I put him. Atomic has been unhappy with my perspective on his game in the past. I think that every player should feel that way. Like if you're Atomic, you probably think you're one of the better players in the world. Look at what Twisted Minds were just able to do. He was a big part of that comeback against Carmine Core. How is he this low? How is he in between? How is he just ahead of Rusty's, who Team BSK are still very, very raw and scrappy, and behind Archie, who's not even at this event? I get it. I feel pretty good about the placement, to be honest with you. I think he's the third most valuable player on Twisted Minds. Twisted Minds had a great result. But if you were to run the event 10 times, I think this is about where it would go, right? And that's kind of like, it wasn't exactly what I was trying to do, but it's kind of just like the framework that I was kind of subconsciously thinking about, where it's like, if you were to like run all these players a ton of times, how do you think that it would kind of come out in the mix? And I feel like that's about where Atomic would be, to be honest with you. Justin, Rusty's 95, I'm super high on. I won't do it again because I've already done it. Cite what I've said about players like Joyo and Swift and First Killer and Beast Mode. I think Rusty's has shades of that, and very young team. First split, still put some people on notice. Took Vitality very, very deep. Had a couple big wins. Big Rusty's 95 guy. Bigger than most. I'm too high on him. This is too high up the list. It's my list. I like him so much. I think this is a fair spot for him. Reveal, Oli, CRR. Not too much to say there. I really need to I need to flesh out my perspective on reveal. I've watched a lot of Kofor, I've watched a lot of Scribbles, and I'm so entranced by those two players that a lot of what I catch from reveal is kind of he's on the pitch, but it's not from his perspective. Oli has been constantly around this range for seasons on a ton of different rosters. That is a credit to him. Truly a Swiss Army knife. CRR. I really like his game. Excuse me. All right, last row. KV1, Rezi, Diaz, two piece, Mozzarella, 5-up, Wavy, and Reddles. I'm trying to get Wavy on the podcast eventually, guys. So he had to make the list. Reddles, I was going to make another joke, and jokes aside about Wavy, I do think that he deserves to be around this range. He beat out a couple of the next 10 in, which I'm going to give you at the end of this and then post on Twitter as well here in a second. Let's actually start on the other end, why don't we? KV1, that feels good, right? Somebody actually told me that they think KV1 should be a couple rows higher. Respect for sure. Rezi, I think he's the best player on 100%. They had an awful split, but they had a really good first split. They were in the mix until GK did what GK did, and knocked 100% out of the tournament. But I'm a big fan of Rezi, and I wanted to not just be like, okay, let's look at the 48 major players and just put all of them in here. I do think that Rezi is better than all the other players that could have been here. Diaz scores the most goals for complexity. Very, 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 very good ones player. Very good twos player. Needs to prove it a little bit more in 3v3. The results show that. Same goes for two piece. I'm holding out hope. My two piece stock has been slowly degrading since I made a video about him 2 seasons ago, where I was like, every team should want this guy to build around. We're slowly diminishing. We're devolving. But I still think he's too good of a player to not be on this list. And he could be a little bit higher if they perform. Mozzarella, Rusty's, like, I love Rusty's. Look at where I got him, guys. Swift and Rusty's are like my two young, like, oh yeah, these guys. I could be wrong. Could be like a Killian Hayes situation where it's like he's the truth and then he is out of the league in a couple of years. Killian Hayes only 24 next year. Pretty crazy. But yeah, Mozzarella I think is very, very good. Very, very good. Him and Rusty's kind of traded the baton on how impressive they were. So I felt good about putting him here. I think I'm so high on Rusty's that the orbit around him, the gravitational force, sucked Mozzarella into my top 50. Also love a name like Mozzarella. And he's French. French-Italian Mozzarella? I can't recall. 5-up. Friend of the pod. I think his game's that good. I do. And I wanted to, in the same way, spotlight a player like Rezi. I really did my homework and I tried to dive deep into these, look through stats, watch some film, go through Liquipedia with a fine-tooth comb for all of our regions, and try and spotlight some of the players who are not on rosters that are at this level. Take some of our North American rosters who didn't make it. Boys, Team Evo. If you want to get a little like crazy with it, What's Up, Deleted Gaming, Shopify Rebellion, and of course Pirates on a Boat. I think 5-up would probably rise to the cream of the crop for me out of all those players. I did think about a player like Evo for a second. Aqua flew past my brain very, very quickly. Even a player like Hoxer on 9 Lives. I was like, hey, but I think I'd rather have 5-up than all of those guys. I think I'd rather have him than Speed Narju and Relating Wave. I think I'd rather have him over Crispy and Coach Ixo and Eris. I think 5-up is the best available player in North America. Deserves to be on the top 50. Wavy is right there as well as a potential prospect. And my voice is starting to get real coarse as we get to our 50th player. You all know him as Captain America, Reddles Slater Thomas. Okay. Next 10 in. in some particular order, but not like exactly. Mata, Growly, Juke, Raise Bull, Tempo, Hoxer, Sphinx, Banana Head, Talk, and Tullem. I hope I did the pronunciation justice. Tullem from Team Vision, with Mawson and SMW. They're my pick to make it through the LCQ for Mina. If I had to add one more, I would maybe say Nico. Maybe Nico. Who else was on my list who I cut? Ghazi from Team Rock. Any of the Alcatia dudes, I really don't know who's the best out of that group. I said Growly. Um, that's my list, guys. Who else did I forget? Who is? Let me empty the clip while we're here already. If you've made it this deep into the video, um, Super Lucky, Ejby, Gyro, Tho, I already said Sphinx, Sosa, Nico. I didn't include any players retired or ones that I don't think are playing. It seems like Itachi's going to retire. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of smoke. When there's smoke, there might be fire. Chicago's not on here, for example. He made the board last time. Torsos got removed from last time. Sphinx got removed from last time. Inactive players, Radosin, Calm, Alpha 54 wouldn't have made the list, but yeah, didn't include them. Guys, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Thank you for hearing me out. I hope you enjoy that dinner that you've been cooking over the course of watching this whole thing. Get back, unmute yourself from that meeting at work that you've been in this whole time. You've just been shaking your head, and your manager thinks you've been listening, but you're not. You're listening to me talk about Nas and Justin. Thank you guys so much. Let me know your thoughts. I feel like YouTube, while still dangerous, and I'm prepared, I'm bracing myself, it's going to happen. This is just Rocket League. I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it. There will be some venom here, but also, we're closer here. You know what I mean? Twitter is its own deal. I got people on Twitter, but it's you and me. You know what I mean? We're closer here. We're tighter here on YouTube. So let me know in the comments below what you think about this. Guys, as always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with me. And until next time, take it easy.